The snow fell like silent ash over the ruins of men's sanity. In the heart of the Hürtgen Forest, where the trees stood like gravestones under a white shroud, an entire battalion vanished into the storm. They called them the Iron Cross Division, soldiers of the Reich who believed they were marching toward glory. But history would remember them as something else, ghosts of a war that had already devoured too many souls. No one knew what really happened in those frozen woods, only that none of them ever came back. Before you continue this story, make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a heartbeat of those who never returned home, but never stopped fighting. The year was 1944. Winter had tightened its grip around Europe like a strangler's hand. Hitler's war machine, once roaring with confidence, now coughed and bled under the relentless pressure of the Allies. But deep in the forests of Belgium, a desperate plan was forming, a final counteroffensive that could change everything. Operation Wacht am Rhein, they called it. The Americans called it the Battle of the Bulge. Among the countless divisions preparing for that assault was one particularly hardened regiment, the 157th Iron Cross Battalion. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had seen too much death to fear it anymore. Their insignia bore the Black Cross of the Wehrmacht, but their eyes, those told a different story, hollow, restless, and uncertain of what victory even meant anymore. Their commander, Major Erich Falken, was a soldier carved from stone. At 42, he had outlived 3 wars, 2 marriages, and the last remains of his conscience. He'd fought in Stalingrad, escaped the encirclement at Kursk, and carried a bullet near his lung that still ached when he breathed cold air. To his men he was a legend. To himself he was already a ghost walking among the living. The Iron Cross Battalion received orders to advance through the dense Ardennes forest, cutting through enemy supply lines toward the Meuse River. It was suicide, though no one dared say it aloud. They were to move at night in silence without radio contact. An invisible spear through the enemy's heart, the High Command called it. But the forest was no battlefield. It was a graveyard waiting for its guests. As they marched under the freezing moonlight, the snow thickened, swallowing sound and sight alike. Boots crunched softly, rifles glinted faintly, and breath turned to fog that vanished before their eyes. The men whispered prayers, songs, and names of home, but even their words froze in the air before reaching God. Among them was Corporal Wilhelm Drexler, a farm boy from Bavaria, who had joined the army at 17, believing he was defending his homeland. Now 23, he no longer remembered what that meant. His hands were blistered, his rifle jammed half the time, and his faith had eroded with every corpse he'd stepped over. Still he marched, because that's what soldiers did. On the 3rd night of their advance, the radio went silent. The signal that had guided them through the forest vanished, replaced by static and a faint whisper that none could identify. Major Falken ordered a halt. The men gathered around small fires, hiding the flames beneath their coats to avoid detection. Snow fell heavier now, bending the branches like bowed heads in prayer. "Sir," one of the lieutenants murmured, "the map shows we should have reached the ridge by now." Falken looked at his compass, then at the map. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. He frowned. The ridge should be north, but this damn thing... He tapped it once, twice. The needle danced, then stopped, pointing not north, but deeper into the forest. Something was wrong. The night dragged on, endless and hollow. The snow turned to fog, thick and unmoving. Visibility dropped to mere feet. When dawn broke, the light was pale and sickly, painting everything in shades of grey. That was when they realized they were lost. No ridge, no road, no sign of the other divisions. Only trees, thousands of them, identical and eternal. By the 5th day, rations ran out. Men began to cough blood. One froze to death in his sleep, his eyes open and blue. They buried him under a mound of snow and kept walking. But the deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. Trees grew in twisted shapes, roots clawing up through the snow like skeletal hands. The air carried a faint metallic scent, iron and rot, and then at night they began hearing it, a low distant hum like engines far away, or chanting. At first they thought it was the enemy. Then they realized it came from nowhere and everywhere. Private Weber swore he saw movement among the trees, shadows shifting in unnatural rhythm. Falken dismissed it as nerves. But when the men stood guard at night, The fog would move against the wind, curling around them like something alive. They found an abandoned bunker 2 days later, half buried in snow. Its iron door was rusted shut, but someone, or something, had scratched symbols across it. Strange runes, not German, not Slavic, a cross but inverted. Beneath it, carved crudely into the metal, Nur der Tod kehrt zurück. Only death returns. Hürtgen ordered them inside anyway. The bunker smelled of oil and old blood. The walls were lined with decaying crates and the remnants of uniforms long forgotten. There were bones, is not human, not animal, something in between. Drexler found a journal, its pages damp and nearly illegible. The handwriting was shaky, the words desperate. We followed the orders. We saw the lights in the snow. We thought they were ours, but they weren't. God forgive us. That night, 3 men vanished. No sound, no struggle, only empty bedrolls and footprints leading into the trees, ending abruptly as if swallowed by the snow. Panic began to creep through the battalion like frostbite. Men whispered of curses, of lost units that had marched into these woods decades ago, never to return. Hürtgen, despite his iron discipline, felt the weight of it pressing down. His men were breaking, and worse, so was his belief in the war itself. On the 7th day they saw light again, flickering deep in the forest. Not firelight, something colder, bluer. The men followed. Through the fog they came upon a clearing. At its center stood an old stone church, blackened and cracked, half buried under ice. A broken cross hung from its steeple, twisted like the bones of a dying bird. Inside, candles burned, though no one had lit them. Hürtgen entered first, revolver drawn. The air inside was warm, almost suffocating. The walls were covered in faded murals, soldiers kneeling before faceless figures. And at the altar something gleamed, a metal insignia shaped like an iron cross, but inverted. He reached for it. The ground shook. Outside, the men screamed. Snow exploded into the air, as if the forest itself had come alive. Shadows twisted into shapes, merging, crawling. Drexler fired blindly into the white haze, shouting names that vanished into the wind. When Hürtgen stumbled out, half his men were gone. And in the snow where they had stood were dozens of black crosses, pressed perfectly into the ice. The forest fell silent again. Hürtgen stared at the horizon. The fog rolled forward, and for the first time in his life he didn't know what enemy he was fighting anymore. He turned to Drexler and whispered, "We're not soldiers anymore, Wilhelm. We're witnesses." The storm rose. The forest swallowed them once more. The storm did not pass that night. It lingered, howling through the trees like the voice of something ancient and unforgiving. The Iron Cross Battalion, what remained of it, huddled in the ruins of the old church, their faces pale and hollow, eyes reflecting the flickering light of dying candles. The snow had sealed the doors. They were entombed in ice and silence. Corporal Wilhelm Drexler sat beside a shattered pew, cleaning his rifle for the 10th time, though there was little left to clean. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from what he had seen outside. The crosses in the snow, the shapes that moved without sound. He had fought Russians. He had seen artillery storms that tore men apart, but nothing compared to the stillness of that clearing. It was the kind of silence that didn't just surround you, it entered you. Major Hürtgen stood by the altar, staring at the inverted iron cross he had taken from it. Its metal was unnaturally cold, as though it drew warmth from his skin. He turned it over and noticed faint inscriptions etched on the back, Latin words, barely readable. Milites perditi non redunt. The lost soldiers do not return. He pocketed it, though he did not know why. Perhaps because every war in its madness demanded relics, and this one, whatever it was, demanded believers. By morning, the storm subsided into a haunting calm. The forest outside was unrecognizable. Trees that once stood like soldiers now leaned and twisted, as if reshaped during the night. No tracks remained, of men, of animals, or of time. Hürtgen ordered a recon team to scout the perimeter. 3 men volunteered, Weber, Kraus, and young Adler, the youngest of the battalion, barely 19. They walked out through the thick snow, rifles raised, their silhouettes fading into the fog. They never came back. Hours passed. Then came the sound, first faint, then closer. A rhythmic thudding, like distant drums or boots striking frozen ground. The men aimed their weapons toward the forest. Out of the mist, Adler stumbled forward alone, his eyes wide and glassy. "Weber? Kraus?" Drexler called out. Adler didn't answer. He just kept walking until he reached them, then collapsed face first into the snow. His lips were blue, his pulse faint. On his neck, under the collar, were marks, perfectly circular, burned into his flesh as if something had branded him. When they opened his jacket, they found his dog tags missing. In their place was a strip of old rusted metal, engraved with a symbol no one recognized, 2 overlapping crosses within a circle, surrounded by faded runes. No one spoke for a long time. That night, the whispers returned. They came not from the forest this time, but from inside the church walls. Low, fragmented voices murmuring in a language no one understood. The candles flickered, bending toward the sound as though drawn to it. Hürtgen stood in the center of the room, revolver in hand, eyes darting across the crumbling stone. "Who's there?" he barked. His voice echoed and died. Drexler, trembling, whispered, "Sir." "They're calling us," and indeed that's what it felt like. Each man heard something different. His name, his hometown, the voice of someone long dead. One soldier swore he heard his mother reciting a prayer. Another heard the cries of comrades lost in Russia. The line between the living and the dead began to blur. At dawn, Drexler awoke to find Hürtgen gone. His footprints led outside, straight into the woods. Drexler followed. The forest had changed again. The trees leaned inward, forming a narrow corridor of black bark and white snow. At its end stood Hürtgen, motionless, facing something half-buried beneath the frost, a wrecked half-track covered in icicles and rust. The insignia on its side read 157th Battalion, but that was impossible. That was their vehicle. Drexler approached cautiously. The door of the half-track hung open. Inside were bodies, frozen, skeletal, their uniforms identical to theirs. One wore a name tag that read Wilhelm Drexler. His breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, choking on fear. Hürtgen turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Now you see it," he said softly. "We've been here before." "What do you mean?" Drexler stammered. "These men, this can't be real." Hürtgen's eyes were hollow. "This place isn't on any map, Wilhelm. It's not the Ardennes anymore. It's something older, something that remembers every war, every death. Maybe we're not lost. Maybe we've been claimed." He handed Drexler a notebook, old, weathered, its cover stained with age. "I found this inside." The first page was written in the same trembling handwriting as the journal from the bunker. "They march in circles. They die, they rise, they march again. The forest keeps them. The Iron Cross is their curse." Drexler looked up. The wind howled again, carrying faint echoes. Gunfire, screams, the grinding of engines long silenced. He closed the notebook. "We have to get out." Hürtgen shook his head. "There is no out anymore. By the time they returned to the church, only 6 men were left. The rest had vanished. No sound, no fight, just absence. The kind that settles deep, leaving emptiness where memory should be." That evening, Drexler found one of the missing men's helmets resting on the altar. Inside it lay a single bullet casing, freshly fired. But no one had fired a shot since dawn. He began to pray, not to win, not to survive, but to be remembered. The fog thickened once more. In the distance, they heard engines again, rumbling, familiar and yet impossible. Headlights cut through the mist, moving slowly toward them. Tanks, half-tracks, soldiers marching in formation. "Reinforcements," one man whispered. But as they approached, the truth sank in. The soldiers wore their insignia, the Iron Cross, the same uniforms, the same weapons. They moved like ghosts, their boots never breaking the snow. Hürtgen stepped forward, shouting over the wind, "Identify yourselves!" The leading figure stopped. Its helmet was shattered, revealing a pale, unrecognizable face. It raised a trembling hand in salute, then disintegrated into ash. The others followed, fading one by one, until nothing remained but snow swirling in their place. Drexler fell to his knees. "What are we, Major?" Hürtgen didn't answer. He looked down at his own hand and saw it shaking, translucent in the candlelight. That night, Drexler wrote the final entry in his logbook. "We no longer march for victory. We march because the forest commands it. The war is over, but not for us. We are the lost battalion, the Iron Cross that history forgot." As the snow fell once more, the church disappeared beneath it, swallowed whole by the earth. And somewhere far above, the war continued, unaware that below the frozen trees, an army still marched in silence, repeating its final orders until the end of time. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It had become a living thing and heavy, breathing, aware. Snowflakes drifted down like the remnants of burned paper, melting before they ever touched the ground. Beneath that endless white canopy, the last fragments of the Iron Cross Battalion wandered, their boots sinking into snow that seemed to resist every step, as if the earth itself was unwilling to let them go. Major Hürtgen led from the front. His uniform was torn, his revolver empty, but his eyes still carried that hard, unyielding fire, the look of a man who had seen hell and refused to blink. Beside him trudged Drexler, carrying the rusted insignia in his pocket like a relic of damnation. Neither spoke anymore. There were no words left that hadn't already frozen on their tongues. By now, time had lost meaning. Days bled into nights. Hunger had become a dull ache. The snow, once clean and white, had turned grey, mixed with soot and ash. And yet something guided them, an invisible pull. They followed a trail of frozen trees, all split in half as though struck by lightning. At the center of that scarred grove stood a figure, tall, motionless, wearing a tattered Wehrmacht coat. His head was bowed, hands clasped behind him. "Identify yourself," Hürtgen barked. The figure raised its head. It was Captain Reinhardt, Hürtgen's second-in-command, dead these 7 days. His face was pale, the eyes lifeless yet aware. "You shouldn't have come back, Major," he said in a voice like cracking ice. "You broke the circle." Drexler froze. "The circle?" Reinhardt turned his hollow gaze toward him. "This forest is a wound, Corporal. Every war bleeds into it. The Romans, the Prussians, the Russians, and now us. We all came here believing we were chosen. But no one leaves." Hürtgen clenched his fists. "If you are real, then tell me, what are we? Where are we?" Reinhardt smiled faintly, a twisted echo of his old grin. "We're history's leftovers, Eric. The forest doesn't forget. It keeps its dead to remind the living what they've done." He stepped closer. The snow beneath him didn't move. "Do you remember, Major? Do you remember what we buried here before the retreat?" Hürtgen's heart stuttered. He did remember. He'd hoped he never would. It was the winter of 1943 on the Eastern Front. The Iron Cross Battalion had captured a village suspected of harboring partisans. Orders were clear: purge it. No survivors. When it was done, the villagers, men, women, children, were gone. And among the ashes, his men had found something they couldn't explain: a stone altar, carved with old runes buried under the church floor. Hürtgen had ordered it sealed, buried beneath the frozen soil. He thought that was the end of it. Now, standing in the same snow, he realized the truth. They hadn't escaped the war. They had returned to its grave. "You unleashed it," Reinhardt whispered. "The altar wasn't meant for us. It was meant to keep something in. But we broke the seal, and now we march forever." His form began to fade, the edges dissolving into mist. "You'll see them soon, Major. All of them." Then he was gone. The forest exhaled. A cold wind surged through the clearing, and with it came the sound of boots, thousands of them. The ground trembled. From every direction shapes emerged. Soldiers in tattered uniforms from every century. Napoleonic coats, medieval armor, Soviet greatcoats, all bearing wounds that never healed. Their faces were pale, hollow, but their eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. Drexler whispered, "What is this?" Hürtgen's voice cracked. "Judgment." The ghostly army formed ranks around them, silent as snowfall. At their head stood a figure in black armor, its face hidden beneath a steel mask shaped like a skull. It carried no weapon, yet the air around it vibrated with power. When it spoke, its voice echoed like 1,000 dying soldiers. "Major Eric Hürtgen," it intoned. "Bearer of the Iron Cross, you brought death to this soil. Now this soil brings you to death." Hürtgen raised his chin, defiant even as his breath fogged in terror. "I served my country." The figure's eyes burned brighter. "Your country is dust. Your orders were ash, but your guilt endures." Drexler fell to his knees, sobbing. "We didn't know. We were just following commands." The armored figure turned to him. "All soldiers say that. All wars say that. Yet here you stand, repeating it while history rots around you. The snow rose around them like a tide. One by one, the ghostly soldiers stepped forward, touching the living men of the Iron Cross. With each touch, another German soldier fell, not in pain, but in surrender, fading into the mist as though being absorbed into the ranks of the dead. Falcon and Drexler were the last two left. "Major," Drexler whispered, "if this is punishment, maybe we can end it. Maybe if we destroy that cross." Falcon hesitated. He reached into his coat and pulled out the inverted iron cross he had taken from the altar. The metal pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. The masked figure extended a hand. "Give it back, and your march will end." But Falcon didn't trust it. He looked at Drexler. "If this thing began with us, maybe it should end with us." He raised his pistol, one remaining bullet chambered, and aimed it at the relic. Drexler stepped beside him. Together they fired. The gunshot echoed through the forest like thunder. The iron cross shattered, and the world screamed. The forest convulsed. Trees split, snow turned to ash. The ghostly soldiers wailed, their forms unraveling into smoke. The masked figure raised its arms to the sky as cracks tore through its body, light pouring out like molten fire. Drexler fell to the ground, covering his ears. Falcon staggered forward, clutching his chest as if something inside him was breaking. Through the chaos he heard a whisper, faint, female, familiar. "You can't erase what was done, but you can remember." He looked up and saw the ghost of a little girl standing in the snow where the altar once was. Her eyes were kind, forgiving. Falcon sank to his knees. "I'm sorry," she smiled. "Then you can rest." The storm ceased. When Drexler opened his eyes again, the forest was gone. The snow had melted into mud. Birds sang somewhere distant. The air was warm and spring-like, but the ground was littered with rusted helmets and bones, remnants of battles centuries apart. Falcon was gone. Only his iron cross lay in the dirt, cracked in half. Drexler picked it up. It was warm now, almost alive. He looked toward the horizon where sunlight pierced through the trees. For the first time he heard no echoes, no whispers, and only the soft hum of peace. He walked toward it step by step, leaving no footprints behind. And as the wind blew gently across the clearing, a voice, calm, ancient, whispered through the branches. Some wars never end. They simply forget their names. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. Drexler walked without direction, his rifle slung across his shoulder, the cracked iron cross warm in his palm. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving. The war, the noise, the screams, all had faded into a strange, unbroken calm. But deep down he knew this wasn't peace. It was the silence that comes after something ends, but before something worse begins. The sky above was grey, but no snow fell. The world felt paused, frozen between breaths. Every sound, his boots, his heartbeat, his breathing, seemed too loud, like they didn't belong here. He reached a clearing where the trees thinned, revealing a ridge. From there he could see what looked like smoke, rising in thin black ribbons far in the distance. Civilization, or what was left of it. He made his way toward it, stumbling through mud and frost until he found a dirt road, old, broken, lined with signposts whose lettering had long been eroded. One sign still barely readable, Hürtgen. The name struck him like a memory. The Hürtgen Forest, where entire divisions had vanished during the war, their bodies never recovered. Drexler froze. If this was the Hürtgen, then he was back in Germany. But how? He had marched west into Belgium. He should have been hundreds of miles away. A distant engine broke the silence. Drexler dropped to one knee, clutching his rifle. A truck approached slowly, its headlights flickering through the mist. It wasn't a German truck, too modern, too clean. As it drew closer, Drexler realized something chilling. The truck's emblem wasn't military. It was a Red Cross, a medic unit. The truck halted and two men stepped out, wearing olive-drab uniforms with insignia he didn't recognize. Their helmets were round, their accents foreign, American. One of them raised a hand. "Jesus, are you seeing this? He's in full Wehrmacht gear?" Drexler blinked. Who are you?" The soldier frowned. "Buddy, we should be asking you that." "You lost or something?" Drexler opened his mouth, but no words came out. Everything around him seemed slightly wrong. The soldiers' faces, their truck, even the air, it all looked too clean, too alive. Then he saw the patch on the man's sleeve. U.S. Army, 1972. Drexler staggered backward. That's not possible. The medic looked at his partner. 1972? What the hell's this guy talking about? They exchanged glances, confusion turning to unease. One stepped closer. You look pale, man. You injured? But Drexler didn't hear him. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the forest behind him shimmered faintly, as if viewed through heat waves. For a split second he thought he saw them again, his battalion marching in the fog, faces blank, uniforms faded, disappearing one by one into nothingness. The medic's voice cut through. We need to get you to base. They loaded him into the back of the truck. Drexler sat quietly, staring at his reflection in the metal wall. His face looked older. His beard had grown white. His hands shook. As the truck rumbled down the forest road, he saw something glinting outside, a rusted sign half buried in the mud. The letters were faded but still legible enough to chill his blood. Zone Restricte, 1944 battlefield site, entry forbidden. He whispered to himself, No, I never left. At the base, doctors surrounded him asking questions, name, rank, service number. Drexler gave them all. They checked their records. No such soldier existed. No unit named 157th Iron Cross Battalion had been documented. Not in any archive, not in any record. It was as if the battalion had never existed at all. They ran blood tests. The results confused them. His samples showed cellular decay inconsistent with human lifespan. They told him gently that something was wrong, that maybe it was shock, maybe trauma. But Drexler knew better. He had crossed a line that no man should cross, the line between war and whatever came after. That night, they placed him in a small medical cabin for observation. Rain fell steadily outside, and the forest loomed beyond the window. Drexler couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard boots in the distance, marching, faint but steady. He rose and opened the window. The rain smelled of iron. On the far edge of the camp, he saw figures standing just beyond the floodlights. Dozens of them, uniforms soaked, faces hidden beneath helmets. They stood in formation, motionless, watching him. He whispered their names, Weber, Kraus, Adler, and then softly, Falcon. The leading figure raised its hand in salute. Drexler's heart pounded. What do you want from me? The whisper came not from the air but from inside his mind. Remember us. The next morning the guards found his room empty. No sign of struggle. The window open. Only his old Iron Cross medal lay on the bed, polished clean, shining as if newly forged. Days later, a search team scoured the forest but found nothing. No tracks, no footprints, no body, and yet, some nights when fog rolled over the Hürtgen, patrols swore they could hear it again, the faint rhythm of marching boots echoing through the trees. They called it the March of the Lost Battalion. But one American officer, Captain Harris, refused to let it go. He took the medal, sent it to a historian in Berlin. The man wrote back weeks later, confused and frightened. He said the engraving on the back didn't match any official German design. The words were old, far older than the war itself. Latin barely legible, non mortui sed damnati, not dead but condemned. From that day on, the medal was locked in a secure military archive. But strange things began to happen in the base. Radios turning on by themselves, boots clattering at night, frost forming on windows in midsummer. And once, during a storm, a young private swore he saw a figure standing by the forest fence, saluting him before vanishing into the mist. When asked to describe him, the private hesitated, then said quietly, "He wore an iron cross, and he was crying." Berlin, 1991. The city had changed, new buildings, new borders, new beginnings. But beneath the modern face of Germany, the shadows of the past still lingered like smoke, trapped under glass. Dr. Lucas Reinhardt adjusted his glasses as he entered the Bundesarchiv, the Federal Archives of Germany. The marble floors echoed under his steps. He wasn't a soldier, but his work dealt with ghosts of war. As a historian, he specialized in unsolved wartime disappearances. Yet nothing had consumed him quite like the lost battalion of Iron Cross. For decades, reports had surfaced of a mysterious Wehrmacht unit, the 157th Battalion, which vanished without record somewhere near the Hürtgen Forest. Officially, it never existed. Yet Reinhardt had seen too many fragments, dog tags found by hunters, faded photographs showing soldiers whose uniforms bore no known insignia, and one chilling artifact that now sat in a sealed glass case before him, the Iron Cross medal recovered in 1972. He leaned closer. The medal was spotless, almost too perfect. He read the Latin again. Non mortui sed damnati, not dead, but condemned. Something about those words unsettled him. He felt as if the air around the glass case had grown colder. A faint tapping echoed through the hall, as if metal was striking stone, steady, rhythmic. He turned, but the corridor behind him was empty. Later that night, Reinhardt sat in his small Berlin apartment, surrounded by old military maps. He traced the lines of the Hürtgen Forest. The region had been bombed to ruin during the last months of 1944. Tens of thousands had died there, but records showed a single anomaly, a radio signal logged by Allied forces in March 1945. Months after the battle had ended, the message was faint, in German Morse code, Einheit 157, Hält Position, keine Rückkehr, Unit 157, holding position. No return. Reinhardt froze. No return. He checked the coordinates. They led to an unmarked valley on the western edge of the forest, a restricted area still under NATO control. Officially, it was sealed due to unexploded ordnance, but Reinhardt knew that was just a convenient lie governments used when they wanted the past to stay buried. A week later, with forged clearance papers and a borrowed military jeep, he made his way into the Hürtgen. The road twisted through skeletal trees, their bark scorched and blackened as if the forest had never healed. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. His radio crackled. Then a voice whispered through static, faint, almost human. Rückkehr verboten. Return forbidden. Reinhardt slammed the radio off. It had to be interference, but a cold unease settled over him. By dusk he reached the valley. It was as if time itself had died here. No birds, no wind, just stillness. He saw remnants of bunkers, rusted helmets half buried in mud, and a trench line leading into the hill, sealed with collapsed stone. He began digging with his shovel, hands trembling. Hours passed until his blade struck something metallic. An old steel door welded shut. A small emblem was still visible, the Iron Cross with faint numbers etched beneath, 157. He pried it open. A rush of stale air escaped, thick with the scent of rot and rust. He stepped inside with his flashlight. The bunker stretched deep underground. The walls were marked with clawed handprints, as if men had tried to escape. Tables were overturned, helmets scattered. On one wall words were scratched in German, Der Himmel hört uns nicht mehr, oh, die heaven no longer hears us. His light flickered. He tapped it, and for a moment he thought he saw movement, a figure at the far end of the corridor, standing perfectly still. Where is da? He called. No answer. He moved closer. The figure was a man, or what was left of one. A uniform still clung to his body, the insignia of the Iron Cross tarnished but visible. But the face was wrong. It looked preserved, untouched by decay, the eyes wide open as if frozen mid-scream. Reinhardt stumbled back, horrified. Then his flashlight caught something else, dozens of them, rows of soldiers, perfectly preserved, standing upright, their boots aligned, rifles in hand, waiting. He stepped forward, heart hammering. On a table near the command post, he found a journal bound in cracked leather. The cover bore one name, Captain Falcon. He opened it. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting. Day 18, the radio stopped working. The forest moves when we sleep. Weber disappeared last night. Day 25, the air burns our lungs. We are not dying. We are being kept alive. Day 39, Drexler claims he hears marching. He says they are us. Day 51, we can't leave. The forest won't let us. We are condemned. The last page was just one line scrawled in blood. If you find this, remember us. Reinhardt backed away, breathing hard. The flashlight flickered again, and this time, all the soldiers' heads turned toward him in unison. He ran. The sound of boots echoed behind him, hundreds of them pounding the floor. He didn't dare look back. He burst through the bunker door and into the rain, gasping for air. Behind him, the valley was silent again, as if nothing had moved. He drove back to Berlin that night, the journal clutched in his trembling hands. The next morning, he brought it to the archives. They scanned it, studied it, verified the ink and paper. It was authentic, 1945. But then something happened. The digital scans came back corrupted. Every image showed the same distortion. Behind Falken's last written words, faint silhouettes of soldiers could be seen, blurred but visible, standing in formation. The government quietly seized the journal. Reinhardt was told to drop the matter. He refused. Weeks later, his colleagues found his apartment door wide open. Inside, his notes were scattered, his recorder still running. The last thing he ever said was caught on tape. "I think they found me. I hear them outside, boots marching. God, they never stopped marching." The tape ended with the sound of a door creaking and a faint voice whispering in German. "Willkommen zurück, Hauptmann. Welcome back, Captain." Reinhardt was never seen again. And now, deep beneath the Hürtgen vault, the Iron Cross still gleams faintly in the dark. Some say it glows brighter every year, as if waiting for orders that will never come. The Hürtgen Forest never truly died. Even now, decades after the war, it remains a scar across the land, silent, endless, and heavy with memory. The trees have grown back, yes, but beneath their roots, history still breathes. It was 2005 when the story resurfaced. A group of NATO engineers, clearing old minefields near the valley, stumbled upon something strange. Beneath the soil, perfectly preserved under layers of mud and time, they found a helmet, shining, uncorroded, its insignia unmistakable. The Iron Cross with the number 157. At first, they thought it was an artifact, just another piece of forgotten war metal. But when one of the engineers, Corporal Jensen, lifted it to inspect, the inside was warm, as if someone had just worn it. That night, their camp was filled with whispers. Jensen claimed he saw figures moving in the tree line, soldiers in grey uniforms, their boots sinking into mud without sound. Others laughed it off until morning came. Jensen was gone, his tent empty, his footprints leading toward the forest, and then stopping mid-step, as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The site was immediately sealed, but word spread of a haunted battlefield of soldiers lost in time. And when the NATO archives received the report, one man demanded access: Colonel Victor Drexler. The name caused confusion at first. Drexler? That couldn't be. The only soldier by that name on record was declared missing in action in 1945. Yet the identification and credentials were all legitimate, verified, and recent. His photo showed an older man, face stern but familiar. He arrived at the Hürtgen site 2 weeks later, silent and composed. When he reached the valley, he stood motionless, eyes fixed on the trees. "This is where it ended," he said quietly, "and where it must end again." The other officers didn't understand. They assumed he was just another historian. But Drexler wasn't there to study history. He was there to finish it. That evening, as the fog rolled in, he walked alone into the forest, ignoring every order to stop him. When the search team followed hours later, they found nothing, just a single trail of footprints that led to the rusted steel door of the old bunker. It was open. Inside, they found the remnants of old uniforms, bones fused into stone, and deep on one wall and fresh writing. 3 words, written in red: "Wir marschieren weiter," we march on. At dawn, the entire site was abandoned. The NATO report was sealed under classified paranormal phenomena, never released to the public. But months later in Berlin, a package arrived at the Bundesarchiv with no sender's name. Inside was a journal, the same one that had belonged to Dr. Lucas Reinhardt. Except now, it had new pages. The handwriting was shaky, aged, but unmistakable. It read, "They never died. The forest holds them between worlds. Every war feeds it. Every death adds another march. I have seen them. They march because they cannot stop. I have joined them." And below the signature, barely visible in the ink smear, one name stood clear: V. Drexler. The archivist who opened that package never returned to work. He left Berlin, vanished somewhere near the western border. His last phone call, recorded by his wife, was only 7 seconds long. A whisper drowned by static. "I can hear them, boots, hundreds of them. They're coming through the fog." After that, the line went dead. To this day, local hunters and hikers avoid the Hürtgen Forest after dark. Some claim to have seen lights moving deep in the forest, old lanterns swinging in rhythm. Others say if you stand still enough, you can hear the echo of German voices calling roll. And sometimes, on windless nights, the ground trembles ever so slightly, like the beat of synchronized marching. They say the lost battalion is still there, not as spirits, but as something worse, men trapped in an endless loop, soldiers who never received the order to stand down. Their war never ended, and every time the world begins to burn again, every time nations prepare for new conflict, that forest grows colder, the fog thicker, as if it remembers, as if it's waiting for the next command. The Lost Battalion of Iron Cross. A story that began in blood and never truly ended, because some battles aren't meant to be forgotten, and some soldiers were never meant to die. Some stories end in silence, but the echo of their courage never fades.